Welcome, welcome. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam,
Malacham asher
asher
tisham
kitshanu
v'torah
b'mitzvotav v'tzionu
v'tei
la'asok b'divrei
Torah.
Torah. Yes. Okay, so what's nice is that we're starting a new parsha today, and we're on to the third parsha of Genesis, of Lech Lecha, where we start the narrative regarding Abram and the very first Jew, right? Ivri, the first Hebrew. So the verse says, "Vayomer Hashem el Avram." Hashem said to Abram, "Lech lecha." That's sort of an interesting um, terminology. Like you can see the play on words there, but go for yourself, right? Go for yourself. Me'artzecha, from your land, and from Mimoladecha, and from your birthplace, Beit Avicha, and from your father's house. Notice the duplication going on there. Ve'el haaretz asher areka, to the land which I will show you. And the issue is that we God doesn't tell Abram where he's sending him. It's interesting that this opening verse has a lot, that needs to be sorted out, right? So we did the Rashi. We have, in fact, in another place on my page, you can find the Rashis that we've done on this. But here we're doing Torah Temimah by Rabbi Baruch Halevi Epstein, much later, I believe, perhaps 19th, early 20th, somewhere in the 20th century, around about that time. At any rate, so look at that. Guess what we're talking about? Lech Lecha. Go for your sake. So it begs a question, which is, in what sense was it for Abram's own sake, right? What benefit, right? Yeshomrim. So there are those who say, Shinui Makom, that a change of location, that when you change your location, Korea Gzar Dimo, that it rips up the sentence, Shaladam, that a person has. And because we conceive of God as of the creator as being the great judge of the universe, that this universe in which we live is founded on justice, right? That every person, every individual has a sentence, so to speak, as to what the future is going to be. And as we approach Rosh Hashanah at this particular time, this is exactly what we're talking about. That we have a statement that says that at Rosh Hashanah, it is determined as to what the fate of that individual is going to be, what our fate is going to be for the coming year, and that we have between Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur in which to look into ourselves, to do our spiritual stock taking, to try to apologize where it is necessary, to try and find forgiveness, and to really look into our behaviors and see what we can do that needs to be adjusted. The truth is that we actually have all the way until Hoshana Rabbah in which to do this. But technically, and let's say up front, we have until the end of Yom Kippur, until Ne'ilah, that service that's called Ne'ilah, which means locking. That is to say that the gates of judgment are locked at that particular point. But we're saying here there are various ways in which your fate may change. And one of those ways is if you have to move from one location to a different location, a different iteration of location. Going on, and the proof text is Shne'emar, as it states, Vayomer Hashem el Avram, Lech lecha me'artzecha. As because we're looking at this whole thing here, where it says the Hashem said to Abram, "Go for your sake, right, from your land, from your birthplace, Vahadar," and after that it says, "Ve'escha lagoy gadol," and I will make you into a great nation. So there's a proof text in this sentence that's to this concept that by changing location, one's fate, so to speak, can be adjusted and changed. And so this is a quote from Rosh Hashanah, from Tractate Rosh Hashanah, page 16, the B side of the page in the Gemara. So Here we go. So here's the footnote. And this is what Baruch Halevi Epstein does in Torah Temimah, is he finds rabbinic sources that he feels sheds light on the Torah portion above and beyond what Rashi has explained. And one of the jobs he does is he translates the Aramaic into Hebrew, and he tries to adjust the way in which the Gemara often says things in a puzzling kind of way or a difficult kind of way, and he tries to simplify the language so that one can understand it better. And then beyond that, he has some very interesting remarks about this. So you can see, I think, basically how the logic of this particular statement, because first of all, we've got the statement about Abram having to change his location, and right after that, it says, I will turn you into a great nation. But what's going to happen is we're going to understand the significance here. And this was implied a little bit from what we said up here, where we talked in the previous parsha, where we ended and talked about Sarah and the fact that she wasn't able to conceive. So there's the clue. In Yat Kriyat Hagzardin, so the issue of the tearing up of this sentence, Bazeh, in this case, Hu Mishum, and the reason is Avraham v'Sarah Hayu Akurim Pateva. They were by nature incapable of conception. They were barren. Essentially, they were barren. And he says, Yen, check out Vide, Sof Parshat Noach. Look at the very end of Parshat Noach. Verosh Perek Parshat Toldot, and also the beginning of Parshat Toldot, where there are other comments. So he is referring, Torah Temimah is referring to this, where it says, Ein Lav Lad, she had no child. Wasn't able to conceive a child. Right, so that's the whole point. That is, so to speak, the sentence that they had was that they were childless. V'ien betosafot gitin, and he says, and look in addition to the commentary of the Tosafot in Tractate Gitin, Memvav, page 46b, shekatvu, that there they wrote, the af al pi de kaimalan ailonit ein la refuah lu'olam, that despite the daf that despite the fact that kaimalan, that we have on record, that we have experience, this we hold both legally, right, and empirically. Ailonit is a woman who is born without reproductive organs, essentially. That is an Ailonit. Ein la refuah le'olam. She never is able to be cured. She never has any kind of cure. But calls it that nevertheless, lo kasher, we do not have a difficulty, right? Because here we're saying, in a sense, that us saying that Sarah and Abraham were incapable of conceiving was a sentence. It was a gzardin. It was an edict, so to speak, a sentence that God had set against them, right? Lo kashe me Sarah. However, they have the statement that an Ailonit, and we say that Sarah was an Ailonit, right here, Imenu Ailonit Haita, right? That we cannot throw a difficulty against the statement of Tosafot, Misara, from Sarah, because the idea is, well, what about Sarah? She was an Ailonit, and here she had a child. How can you say that we have, as a fact, an empirical fact, that an Ailonit can never have a child? Shehaita Ailonit, because she was an Ailonit, V'yelda, and yet she gave birth. Mishum. And so why is this not a difficulty? Why is this not a contradiction to what the Tosafot are saying? Mishum de'en lemeidim mima'aseh nisim, because you cannot draw inferences from miracles. Ad kan l'shuna, okay? So that's that's the point that they make. It's not so Tosafot themselves say, despite the fact that we have on record as an empirical fact that Ailonit are incapable ever of being healed of their barrenness, we do not consider Sarah to be she is an exception to the rule by the fact that the birth of Isaac was a miracle. Right? Ad kan lashonah means end of quote. V'tzarich lomar, and we have to say, the lo kashe midrasha shelefanenu, right? And we should also say, we might have said that there was another difficulty on the Tosafot, on this idea, on what Tosafot had said about the fact that an Eilonit never has any refuah. We could have thrown another contradiction and said, but wait a second, you were saying here that Mishaneh Makom, right? Korea's Gzardin, we could have used that as an argument against what we said, right? So he says, Lo kasha midrasha l'shafanenu. There is no difficulty. We should not consider that a contradiction to this idea. The shinui makom Korea Gzardin, right? Of the fact that a changing location rips up the sentence. Shel Ailunit, in other words, that she has a sentence that she's Anolit, right? Al Kain, right? Im Kain, Halo Yeshrifu Alayunat. We could have said, right? The contradiction would have said, wait a second, you said that an Ailunit can never recover? Okay, well, look at this. We could say that changing the location could have done it and does it. We have that statement. Ya'an, why? Degam inyan refuah kazu, because again, the whole issue of such a kind of healing, right, of an Ailonit, he bichlal ma'aseh it also has to be considered a miracle, right? To say that changing the place of, changing the place of Abraham and Sarah, which allowed them now to conceive, again, the changing place itself, the fact that they were able to conceive is again ma'aseh nisim. It's a miracle. Kevan she'ena al pi hateva, because regardless, this isn't something that happens naturally. Upashuthu, and that is straightforward. It clearly is not a contradiction. We can't try and say, wait a second, we have a contradiction going on here. It's not a contradiction. So you have a little flavor now of the nature of Torah Temimah and the argumentation here. All right. So remember, it went on to say, "Ve'escha legoy gadol," and I will make you into a great nation. Va'avarechecha, and I will bless you. Va'gadla shemecha, and I will cause your name to be great. Right. I will magnify your name. V'heyeh bracha, so that you are a blessing. You will be a blessing. This is now a somewhat, I would say, well-known statement that's going to be made here. And this is from Psachim. This is from Tractates Psachim, page 117b. V'escha v'gomer, right? I will turn you, and all these, right, repetitive statements here. So what the Gemara does is it analyzes and breaks down, deconstructs each little statement. Ve'escha legoy gadol, I will make you into a great nation. Zehu shomrim, that is implied by what is said or alluded to by the fact sheomrim Elohei Avraham, that in the Amidah, right, that when we say that first prayer in the what is called the Amidah, we say Elohei Avraham, va'avarcheka, and I will bless you. Zehu sheomrim Elohei Yitzchak, the fact that we say Elohei Yitzchak, God of Isaac, va'agadla shimcha, and I will cause your name to be great. Zeh sheomrim Elohei Yaakov, and that is the fact that we say in this bracha, God of Jacob. So this statement that we are understanding, that God says to Abram when he tells him to start his journey, his spiritual and physical journey, right, is alluded to by what we say in our Amidah every time we stand up to come into the presence of the divine, and we start off by appealing to God as God of Abraham, God of Isaac, and God of Jacob, our great ancestors. So as you can see, there's a footnote here. Ni'eha kavana. What's the point here? What's the intention? Mishum dematzinu, right? Why? Because we see sheyiched Hakadosh Baruch Hu shmo rak al klal ha'uma, that in general, God only associates His name with the nation itself, like Elohei Yisrael, right? Yisrael is the name of the nation, right? Elohei Yisrael, God of Israel, and the al hayechid, but regarding individuals, matzinu yichudo rak al ha'avot, that when it comes to individuals, we only find that God associates His name with the patriarchs. V'lo matzinu Elohei Moshe. So, for example, we don't ever find Elohei Moshe, Elohei Aharon, or the God of Aaron, and similar. V'hainu haperush, and so this is the explanation. V'escha lagoy gadol, that I will make you into a great nation, right? That is to say, I will consider you, right, as a great nation, if we understand this, shetechashev kagoy gadol, that you will be considered like a great nation, for umma shlema, and like a complete peoples, right? Something like that. It's again, umma is another name for nation. For ayached shmi alecha, and I will associate my name upon you. Vezehu she'amar, and that's the point where it says, quote, Ve'escha lagoy gadol, I will make you into a great nation, Zehu she'omrim Elohei Avraham b'chulei. And that's why we interpret it this way, that when I make you into a great nation, that here we're understanding it not as to what is going to happen in the future, right? But the idea that as the greatness is that he is considered like a nation in the fact that God associates his name with him, with Isaac and with Jacob. Bezulat ha'avot, and other than the patriarchs, Matzinu Yichud Shmo Yitbarach, we do find that there is a connection, right, an association of the blessed one's name, in other words, God's name, al David HaMelech, on King David. We do find an association, not in the way we just read here, but Kamosha Katuv, and we're going to cite where, this is the second book of Kings, chapter 20, it says Elohei David, right? In the God of David, Magen David, right? The shield of David. Omnam, however, Kfar Darshu Chazal, our sages of blessed memory, have already explained Hapasuk Sha'amar HaKadosh Baruch Hu David, the verse which the Holy One, blessed be He, said to David, Va'asiti Lacha Shem Gadol, right? Where the quote is, and I will make you a great nation, a great name. I will turn you into a great name, Keshem Hagadolim Asher Ba'aretz, like the great ones in the land. That's a quotation from the second book of Samuel, chapter 7. Zehu she'omrim Dagen David. So what the sages have said is that is the reference where we talk about Magen David, the shield of David. Not Elohei David, but Magen David. Veromez belashon hagadolim, and in saying, I will make your name like the great ones. Who are the great ones? Laha'avot. It's a reference to the patriarchs. Hashem hadrasha, just as it says, Ve'escha lagoy gadol, va'agadla shimcha, where God says to Abraham, I will make you into a goy gadol, into a great nation, va'agadla shimcha, and I will cause your name to be great. Ulefi Nakatuv ha'inyan mevoar, and according to what I've written, it becomes clear, umakuvan me'od, and we totally understand what's going on here. If you understand the explanation that I've just given you is what Torah Temimah is saying. We have a better notion of how this drush is working. Going on. Yachol yiyu chutmin bechulam. So, in other words, it could be that when we start this bracha, this blessing, with God of Abraham, God of Isaac, and God of Jacob, why, in that case, why, and it's based on the saying, I'm going to make your name great. Well, so why don't we end the bracha with a signature, so to speak, the Baruch Atah at the end of the bracha, bechulam, with all three of them? We don't say at the end, Baruch Atah Hashem, Magen, Magen Avraham Yitzchak v'Yaakov. We don't say that. Okay. There's a footnote here. Yes, sorry, David, please.
Yeah. So I guess the question though is still he didn't really, or maybe I missed it, but it didn't sound like he really answered the part of Elohei David or David, right? It he talked about the shield of David, but not the God of David, right? And it feels like it's still, it wasn't addressed, right? Because it still says that, right? I mean, it does, it's written that way, right? So it does. Anyway, that's what I'm struggling with.
Okay, I appreciate that very much. So what I think it's saying is that the sages understood when in that reference, I believe that quote that talks Elohei David, the God of David, it's not so much that we use it, we don't use that expression in prayer, but we refer to God as Magen David, that's the reference we have to God in connection with David. And in fact, if you think of the blessings after the Haftarah, one of the blessings of the Haftarah talks about Magen David, shield of David.
Mm, yeah.
So it's that we don't in our prayers refer to the God of David. We refer to the shield of David.
Mm, okay.
And it's strictly with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob that we talk specifically about God of Abraham, God of Isaac, and God of Jacob. Okay. Is that
Okay.
a little more comfortable now?
Yeah, yeah. It was just the point of this was that the God of David is, or we only reference the God of statements for Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, right? But in reality, it's also written in the Torah for David. But you're saying that even though it's written that way, it doesn't really it doesn't change the previous point, right? That
Correct,
it's
correct. And I'll just make one small correction because I think you meant it. You said in the Torah, and of course, David is not mentioned in the Torah, but you meant in the Tanakh, in the
yeah, yeah.
Bible.
Sorry.
And
Yeah,
no, but I think in that, you actually bring out a very good point. The fact that it isn't Elohei David in the Torah, right? Or should I
right,
say it more positively, that the Elohei Avraham, Elohei Yitzchak, and Elohei Yaakov is mentioned in the Torah, right? Is
right,
in our prayers we refer to them that way, whereas Elohei David is mentioned in Nach, or rather in Nevi'im, in the prophets, and that's why we refer not to Elohei David, but to Magen David.
ah, got it. Okay, so I
You brought
misunderstood.
that
I
up.
thought,
Yeah.
okay, that clears that up. Okay, it's in a
Okay.
different place too.
It
Okay,
is. It is.
okay,
And it's in a part that's not in the Torah.
right.
And I think, had you not made that very slight error, I don't think I would have appreciated the point the way I do
Yeah.
now, thanks to you.
Well, okay.
Okay. Yes. So look, here is where he says, he says the point is they Shiomrim Magen Avraham Yitzchak Yaakov, right? He's saying we only end the bracha with Magen Avraham Yitzchak Yaakov.
Yeah.
We don't. I mean, we only end with Magen Avraham.
Right.
So that's what he means. Chotmin bekulam. That's what it means here. Okay. So we don't. So why don't we? That's the question. How do we know we're not supposed to end with all three of them? Talmud lomar v'heyeh bracha, because Scripture says, "And you be the bracha." In other words, God speaking to Abram. Bacha chotmin. In other words, they will seal the blessing with you, ve'en chotmin bechulam, and they will not seal the blessing with all three patriarchs. So we covered what we're doing is we're basically looking at a deeper level of the structure of that very first blessing of the Shmona Esrei, of the Amidah.
And again, very briefly, what was the reference point for this particular conclusion?
A pace. I think it says Veheye Bracha. Let's take a look at it. Right here, Veheye Bracha.
Well, I understand.
Is
No,
that
but
what you're referring
the
to?
commentary, what
The
was the?
commentaries in Psachim. The
Okay,
Psachim. Okay,
Safin, got it.
it's
Very
in
good.
Tractate Psachim, page 117b.
Okay, thank you. I lost
Of
that.
course. All right. No problem. All right. So let's take a look at what he says here. Okay. Okay. Yesh lomar. So again, I wanted to say actually that the Amidah represents actually the time in the temple when they would offer the public offerings. That's the nature of the Amidah that we say even to this day is to represent that moment in the temple when the priests would bring a daily public offering, or the Musaf Amidah would refer to the additional public offerings that were brought on the Sabbath and new moons and festivals, etc. But it is a very sacred moment at the moment of, as it were, entering into the divine presence. And so this first bracha, which introduces this process, right, has extreme significance because we're moving into a moment of divine presence. And so mentioning Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, because they are our ancestors, we're sort of, in a way, giving a preamble to why we have a right to say this. I don't think we often think to ourselves, really, who are we? I mean, we may not pray simply because we don't believe in it, etc., etc. But let's suppose we really have a deep belief in the divine nature and the divine essence of this world. And you think of how vast this world is and how we are sort of a blip, a tiny little blip, both in terms of the space we occupy and the amount of time we occupy. We are an absolute like dust. And who are we to think of ourselves as being capable of entering the presence of the divine? And so what we are saying, this particular sensitivity, which is something we need to think about, right? But this particular sensitivity is why we start off with God of Abraham, God of Isaac, and God of Jacob, because we are their descendants. And because God has already associated his presence and his name with them. And we are doing it purely on the merit here of the fact that we are their descendants. And this concept is known as Zechut Avot, which means the merit of the patriarchs. So we have I don't know that I want to call it a right. I'd rather call it a privilege, right, of entering into this very, very, very sacred moment on account of the relationship that was established by our ancestors, these three particular ancestors, with the divine, and because we are their descendants. And that gives us that privilege. So it's not because we think we're so great and so important and so worthy of it, but because we are privileged to be able to do this on account of our ancestors. So let's go on here. Just this is concluding remarks about this particular drash. Yesh lomar, one can say, betam hadavar, right? We're talking now about the chatima, right? That final blessing, Magen Avraham, right? That the reason for this, mishum de inyan hachatima, because the whole issue of this chatima, which means the seal, as it were, of the prayer. In other words, it's like sealing up a letter, sealing up an envelope, that idea, right? Hu she'omrim Magen Avraham, right? It's the fact that we say Magen Avraham. That's what the drush is referring to when it says, it could have been, we might have thought we had to end with all three, and we only end with one. And of course, we say Magen Avraham. Velashon zeh, right? And this particular expression, Matzinu rak ba'Avraham, we only find that in reference to Abraham, she'amar lo HaChadosh Baruch Hu, because again, in the parsha of Lech Lecha, right, the Holy One, blessed be He, says to him, Anochi Magen Lecha. I, that God speaking, referring to himself, Magen Lecha, am your shield. And doesn't say shield of Isaac or Jacob. And so that's why we end with this expression, Magen Avraham. And that is going to do it for today. And before I stop the recording, I'm happy if any of you want to comment. Here we go. All right, give me a second here. Sorry, let's take care of this for next time. Okay, right there, and we'll have it for next time. And I'm going to stop the share.
Great.
All right. So any comments, anyone? And hi, everyone. Good to have you all here. Mead,
I found it very helpful. I mean, that's, well, it's explaining things that you just slide by
right,
with thinking as you
yes,
begin the Amidah.
right. So the Torah Temimah, that's the name of his commentary, Rabbi Baruch Halevi Epstein. It's, I would say, in terms of the religious community, it's a well-known commentary. It's a very respected commentary, and as you go through it, you realize the incredible level of knowledge that he had. And I mean, these are people who are extremely learned. And personally, at this point, I love what he has to say, partially because I can manage it. And of course, it's a delight to learn these things and to discover them. So that's why we do it once a week. And then, but I owe it to Rashi to make sure, and to all of you to make sure we get through all the Rashis as we move through. But if I'm given the privilege and the honor and the longevity, I'm going to go into Torah Temimah, and that would be my next project, would be to again, basically through the week, go through the Torah Temimahs and move slowly through the Torah. So it's amazing. It's an amazing piece. I will stop the recording at this point.